Morning everybody, welcome to Wednesday's Maths. So for our fluency this morning, we're going to warm up by having a look at how we convert some of our fractions into percentages like we did yesterday. Now before you get started, I want you to remember that for some of these, they aren't possible to put over 100 or 10. You need to simplify them, and hopefully that simplifying might make you go, oh yeah, I remember this fraction as a percentage. So have a go, pause the video, come back for some answers. Okay, so for the first one then, 12/16. Now, my brain when I'm looking at these thinks, right, which times table are 12 and 16 both in? They are both in the 4 times table. So that means I'm going to divide my numerator and denominator by 4. So 12 divided by 4 is 3, 16 divided by 4 is 4. So I have an answer here of 3/4. So 12/16 is the same as 3/4. My brain has suddenly remembered what I kept saying over and over last week. 3/4 is the same as 75%. So that's one that we've just got to try and remember. If not, you can then put 3/4 to become over 100. Now 20/40. Again, I'm going to simplify this. Now, there's different ways you could simplify this fraction. You might think, oh, they're both in the 10 times table. So I'm going to divide them both by 10 to make it 2/4. Oh, but that's not as small as it can be. They're now both in the 2 times table. I'm going to divide them both by 2. Aha, it simplifies to a half. Now I know that a half is the same as 50%. Now 44/200, I can quite easily make this into a percentage because I can think, well, if my denominator is 200, how am I going to change that to becoming 100? Well, I've divided that by 2, or I've halved it, haven't I? So what have I got to do to the top? I've got to halve it, so it becomes 22/100. I can get rid of now that, and my percentage is going to be 22%. My final one, 13/20. Well, I'm going to think to myself, okay, so 20ths as my denominator, I know that I can make that into 100ths. So to do that, I times by 5. So I've got to think, right, 13 times 5. Oh, 13 times 5. Well, I know 12 times 5 is 60. So 13 times 5 must be 65. So 13/20 is 65%. So for today's lesson then, we are going to look at finding equivalent fractions, decimals and percentages. All those weeks that we've done on this now all come together because they all relate to one another. So we're going to be able to identify equivalent fractions, decimals and percentages. We're going to represent them as diagrams and then read them from the diagram, and we're going to convert between them. Now, for our Discover then, we have got Ambika and Zach, and they're being taught by Miss Hall. I wonder if she's related to Mr. Hall. And we've got 3 different amounts. We've got 70%, we've got 0.2, and we've got 2/5. Now, you often see questions like this that will say, where should we place each amount on the number line? Now, with a question like this, what I want you to try and do is think, well, I can't really do that at the moment because they're all represented in different forms. We've got to make them the same form in order to accurately put them onto a number line. So let's have a look how we would do that. So let's start first of all with 70%. I'm just going to move my head out of the way. Now, 70% then, I know that 70% is the same as 70/100ths, isn't it? Okay, now I can simplify that down to become 7/10 because I can divide them both by 10. Because if I go back to my previous slide, some of them are fractions, some of them are percentages, some of them are decimals. So I'm going to try first of all and put them into a fraction and then maybe into a decimal. Now 7/10, how do I write that as a decimal? This has got to remember from our previous learning. Well, I think, well, what I need to do, I need my ones, tenths, hundredths and thousandths column, don't I? And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to think, right, well, my 7/10, I haven't got any ones, so I put a 0 here, and I've got 7/10. So the 7/10 is the same as 0.7. Okay, now Let's see what that looks like on 100 square. We've got 7 tenths or 70 out of the 100 or 70% shaded on that grid. So let's have a look at 0.2. Now this time I'm thinking, right, I've got to almost start, haven't I, this time, with where does that appear on my grid? I've got my ones, my tenths, my hundredths, and I've got 0.2. Well, I can see then that 0.2, I've got 2 tenths, haven't I? Now, can I write that as a percentage? Well, to be a percentage, that's got to be out of 100. So I've multiplied by 10, so I've got to multiply this by 10. So as a percentage, this one is the same as 20%. So already, which of these is larger? Well, we can see that 70%, 7 tenths is much larger, isn't it, than 2 tenths and 20%. And here that is on a grid. 2 tenths are shaded, or 20 out of 100 are shaded in. Now our final one, 2/5, I've got to think, right, well, if I want to change this into a percentage, into a decimal, my fifths are making that a little bit tricky. So what is an equivalent fraction to this? Can I put this into tenths, first of all? Yes, I can, because what can I do to my fifths? Well, I can double it, can't I? Times it by 2. So I've now got to do the same to my numerator, times that by 2, which gives me 4 tenths. And now 4 tenths, well, look, if I look at my previous one, 2 tenths, that was 0.2. So 4 tenths must be 0.4 because I've got 4 in the tenths column. Now I also need it as a percentage. So I'm going to go back to my 4 tenths and I would think, well, 4 tenths is the same as 40 hundredths, which is the same as 40%. So there we go. I've got all of those now written in the same form in some way or another. And here is my final diagram with my face over the top. Let's move it. So here I've got 40 out of 100 shaded, or 40%. Now you can see, can't you, really, that 70% has got the most shaded. So that's the largest, it's going to be the highest on our number line. So here is our number line. So you can see that as 0.2, 20%. This is showing it in fifths. It's the same as 2 tenths, isn't it? We could write that on here if we needed to. 2 tenths here, and 0.4, 2/5. That's the same as 4 tenths. But you can see then where they would appear on a number line. Now here's a bit of a deepening question. Now, where would 19/20 go on this number line? Okay, so if we think about 19/20, how am I going to make this fit on here? Because this is either in tenths or in fifths, or in percent or in a decimal. Well, I think what I'm going to do first of all is think, well, if I try and put this over 100, okay, right, so I'm going to think from 20 to 100, I've got to multiply that by 5, haven't I? Now, so that means I've got to multiply by top number by 5. Now, 19 times 5, well, I would think, well, 20 times 5, so 2 times 5 is 10, so 20 times 5 is 100. Therefore, 19 times 5 is going to be 5 less than 100, which is going to be 95. So 19/20 is the same as 95 hundredths. Now, that means as a percentage, we would write that as 95% because we've already got our denominator as 100. To write it as a decimal, there's 95 hundredths. So again, let's have a look. I can write my tenths, my hundredths in. I've got no ones, have I? No holes there. And I have got 95 hundredths. So my decimal will be 0.95. So where would this fall on our number line? Well, look, here's 0.9 and here's 1. Now 0.95 is halfway, isn't it, between there? So 19/20, which we've decided is the same as 0.95, would be there. So I can write that onto my number line just the same as the others. So do you see, in order to do this, you have to have either the same denominators, they have to be written in the decimals or in the percentages in order to be able to put them onto the same number line. And here at the bottom, just remembered I've popped this one in. Look, there it is represented on a grid. So it's 95 hundredths are shaded in. Now then, let's think together, which one is the odd one out? Now, just by glancing at that, what's your first thought? My first thought, and a lot of children's first thought, would be, 2/20ths. That's the odd one out, look, because it's the only one that's got 2's in it. Now I'm going to tell you now, that one is not the odd one out. So maybe pause the video, have a go at what we've just done and try and put them all into the same form, whichever one you find easiest, and see which one you find to be the odd one out, and then come back and we'll work it out together. Okay, so here we are. Let's have a look at this one. Now, I'm going to first of all go through them all. I'm going to sort of do it like a spidergram around each of them, the facts that I know. Now, I know that 0.1 is the same as 1/10, which is the same as 10 hundredths, which is the same as 10%, isn't it? Now, 2/20ths, I can simplify that, can't I? I can make that into tenths because I can divide them both by 2, which is the same as 1/10. So it's going to have the same facts here, look, which is the same as 10 hundredths, which is the same as 10%. 10%, well, we know that's going to be the same as that one. So this is the same as this, which is the same as this. Oh, look, 1/10, that's the same again. 10 hundredths, that's got one of those facts in, so that's the same again. Let's look at this cheeky one here, 0.01. Now, 0.01 is the same as 1/100th, which is then the same as 1%. Now look, this is different to all of these other ones. It doesn't have any of the same facts. So our odd one out, in this case, is actually 0.01. So that place value there on our place value chart was the most important one because it's 1/100th, whereas all of the others there are showing 1/10 in a different form. Okay, and last think together, we're looking at a table here, a comparison table of how to convert from decimals to percentages to fractions. Now, the first one has been done for us. The decimal is 0.5, which is, if we write that as a fraction, over here is 1/2. But my first feeling is for this side that I would think, well, that's the same as 5/10ths, which is the same as 50 hundredths. And that's where this percentage is easy then to come from. And then it's been simplified down to make 1/2 over here. Now I would pause the video, come back and we'll have a look at some of these answers together. Okay, so 0.65, how am I going to write that as a decimal? Well, 0.65 is the same as 65 hundredths. So therefore, we already have our percentage. It's the same as 65%. Now, we then have to think for our final fraction here. Can I simplify that at all? So let's have a look. 65 and 100, which times table do they both occur in? They're both in the 5 times table, aren't they? So if we divide 65 by 5, we get an answer of 13. And if we divide 100 by 5, we get an answer of 20. So actually, in its simplest form, it's going to be 13/20ths. Now then, 6%, this one's a little bit of a harder one. I'm going to start off by doing my fraction. 6% as a fraction is 6 out of 100, isn't it? So it's 6/100ths. Now, if I then try and put that over into a decimal, this is where I have to be careful because it's not 6/10ths this time, it's 6/100ths. So it's going to be 0.06 as my decimal. Can this be simplified? Yes, it can, because they could both be halved, can't they? So it's the same as 3/50ths. So I think that sometimes if you have the percentage, it's easiest to first of all put it into a fraction. Once it's over 100 or over 10, you can then pop it into your decimal form. And after that, simplify, because sometimes once you've simplified, it's then a little bit confusing as to how to put it back into a decimal. So in this case here, 0.0, oh sorry, I've missed one, 3/10ths. So 3/10 over here. Well, let's go back to our decimal because we've got it over a 10. So let's go into our decimal form. So 3/10 means there's no ones, but there's 3 in the tenths column. Now, writing that into a percentage, we've seen it's 3/10. So to write it as a percentage form, it's got to be over 100. So I've multiplied the bottom by 10. I do the same to the top. So as a percentage, this one is going to be 30%. And finally, 0.07 is the same as 7. Let's go over to fractions now, I think. That's 7 hundredths, isn't it? Because there's nothing in our tenths column, but there's 7 100ths, which means this is going to be the same as 7%. So you have to be quite logical when you're working through these, but sometimes it's easy to go from your decimals to your fractions and vice versa. And from there, once you've got your fraction over 100, you can pop it into your percentage. So just think about which way round you're going to do that sorted before you calculate them. All right, so well done. Now for today's work then, you're going to be working on equivalent fractions. It's got equivalent fractions, decimals and percentages actually, part 1, and it's on page 53 to 55. When we're normally at school, if you're in my maths group, I would like you to focus mainly on questions 1 to 4. If you whiz through, keep going with the rest, that's fine, but they're the questions I want you to really have a focus on. You can also just focus on those if you find this a little bit more challenging. So if some of you are finding the challenge and the extension parts hard, just focus on questions 1 to 4 to begin with. Have a great day, good luck, and I'll see you all again tomorrow. Bye-bye.